Hey guys, Attorney Walter Knott. We tried to start the video, but the microphone for the blue would not work. Also, I've noticed that a lot of people are complaining that they're not getting notified when I do my videos. So things are going on with YouTube. They are starting to restrict a lot of the content that I produce. Sadly, it's all based on metrics, facts, statistics, and as a result of that, apparently it's become to the mega companies a bit unpopular, but to the people highly popular. Amazing how that happens. Anyways, I've been sick the past couple of days. That's why I sound a little bit off. However, I just wanted to catch up with you guys. U.S. preps over 8,000 troops for possible deployment to aid Ukraine, Pentagon states. Let's go through this. This is Nicholas Ryman, Forbes staff. This was produced on January 24th, 2022. Today is the 24th, so hours ago, literally hours ago, this was produced. The reason I think this is important is that I thought definitively, no matter what, when war occurs, whether it's with China or Russia or Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever it was, that the economy would do better when a war would actually occur, which would help ultimately the disabled and retired because inflation would not be as bad. I started to click around on the web a little bit, and I found out that my thought pattern was actually learned mostly from articles and videos that were produced on the news, which is where I know to get my usual false news, and that the actual statistic analysis is very different from that. Let me walk you through it real quick. I'm going to keep this video relatively short because I am sick, but here we go. Top line, up to 8,500 U.S. troops are now under heightened preparedness for a potential deployment to aid Ukraine under orders from President Joe Biden, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said Monday, though he emphasized no decision has been made on whether the troops will actually go. If anybody actually knows why Ukraine is that important, other than my genetic line came from there at some point, as it was getting shuffled into Germany and then literally rushed out of there to get to America because, obviously I have Jewish heritage. But point is this, can anybody actually figure out, other than having, military in Ukraine, other than that, why Ukraine is so important? I still haven't figured out a good reason for that. Okay, let's go through this. It's very clear the Russians have no intention of de-escalating, Kirby said at a news conference. Biden planned a call Monday afternoon to discuss the Russia-Ukraine situation with European leaders, as international forces bolster defense capacity in Eastern Europe, including in the Baltic Sea and Black Sea. Ukrainian forces recently received 90 tons of military supplies from the U.S. Just 90 tons. You multiply that by 2, and then add the thousands. That's how massive a military surplus of supplies they've just sent over there. Imagine your tax dollars at work going to Ukraine. All right, here we go. Ukrainian forces recently received 90 tons of military supplies from the U.S. as part of a $200 million in additional lethal aid Biden authorized last month. So as part of a $200 million in additional lethal aid. It's a lot of money, guys, a lot of money. Biden has warned of unprecedented sanctions if Russia launches an invasion of Ukraine, not that Russia cares. While Russian President Vladimir Putin has insisted NATO pull back its forces from Eastern Europe and agree not to grant Ukraine membership into the military alliance. The U.S. over the weekend ordered non-emergency diplomatic employees and the family of diplomats to leave Ukraine. All right. Oh, wow. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, good sir. De jure is still out. Very good. I love your titles. Your titles are very good. That's very good sir. That actually made me smile for the first time, like the weekend, because I was sick all weekend. All right, so I want to point out something big here. The U.S. over the weekend ordered non-emergency diplomatic employees and the families of diplomats to leave Ukraine. A move Ukrainian officials claimed was premature. That's something that basically we started to see, with a lot of these other legal or law-related exchanges that were just massive. You don't usually see that until something's cooking. What to watch for? Russia could respond with a cyber attack if the U.S. continues to increase its involvement in Ukraine. According to a Department of Homeland Security memo obtained by CNN, the memo reportedly warned that the Russian response could include destructive attacks targeting critical infrastructure. Tangent. Biden predicted at a news conference Wednesday that Russia will move into Ukraine, but sparked controversy by saying there is disagreement among NATO members about how to respond to a minor incursion. He issued a stronger statement in support of the Ukraine Thursday, saying if any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border, that is an invasion. Yeah, obviously. Let there be no doubt that if Putin makes this choice, Russia will pay a heavy price. So would America. All right, so that's the article. So thoughts. Are we going to be seeing the passing of the Social Security 2100 Act? Are we going to be seeing the Supplemental Security Income Restoration Act being passed if we now have a potential war sitting on our shoulders? No, because they're going to be busy in Congress constantly making new legislation to afford and pay for this quasi-war, which I don't know why America would ever really want to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. I get the whole Taiwan situation, strategic, roads of commercial transport. I get that, but Ukraine, I don't get that at all. I don't know. Let's talk about the economic aspect of it, because ultimately, if the United States does well economically, right, then hopefully it would reduce the likelihood of that increased galloping inflation that we're seeing. If we're doing well economically, hopefully we would see the US dollar become worth more and then be able to support people even more than it currently has been, because it's just now getting so expensive to the point that it's like, buying groceries at the store is equivalent to 2 years ago going to a restaurant. Institute for Economics and Peace, Economic Consequences of War on the U.S. Economy. This was a document produced which does a really good job outlining the statistical relevance of what happened at each war, Vietnam, World War II. I'll read you through it. An overview of the macroeconomic effects of government spending on war and the military since World War II. It specifically examines 5 periods: World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Iraq/Afghanistan War, summarizing the effects of financing the wars on consumption, investment, taxes, government deficits, and inflation. So it's basically a walkthrough article, an actuarial document. Okay, let's go to the summary here, because I don't want to have to walk you through with all the charts. All right, here we go. Now let's start here. Government policies associated with funding these conflicts, the wars we just talked about, resulted in the following economic indicators experiencing negative effects either during or after the conflicts. Public debt and levels of taxation increased during most conflicts. That's not good, because the more we tax people, the less likely they're going to be able to afford to pay into programs to be able to, help boost these programs like retirement, disability benefits, in the sense of Social Security, disability insurance, and even SSI. Number 2, consumption as a percent of GDP, gross domestic product, decreased during most conflicts. That's interesting, because the news always taught us that consumption would increase, right? We'd be constantly buying new military toys, more bullets, more parachutes, whatever. Consumption as a percent of GDP decreased during most conflicts. Investment as a percent of GDP decreased during most conflicts. I was always taught from the news that, yeah, Rosa Soda, you're right. I mean, is war ever cost effective? Certainly not a modern war. It's just so expensive to send that many personnel over. Invest and the toys. You think my love of boating is expensive, even though I buy broken, destroyed boats and then rebuild them? You should see what those toys cost for the military. This is a very different pretty penny. I couldn't afford one of those in my entire lifespan. Investment as a percentage or of a percent of GDP decreased during most conflicts. So we were always taught that our investment into that GDP would increase, right? That war was good, the wartime effort, right? maybe World War I, maybe earlier wars, maybe, but this document states otherwise. Inflation increased during or as a direct consequence of these conflicts. All right, so this is the one I'm most worried about. Here's why. The nice thing about being retired and disabled, although it's not that great, is that you are assured a check until it basically runs out or runs low, which for the retired people is in 10 years, which a lot of people don't know, including many of the SSA reps I talk to and ask if they know about that, which they don't. So the bottom line here is this: inflation increases during or as a direct consequence of these conflicts. The last thing we want is increased inflation. We don't want to go from galloping to hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, very scary. That means we can't afford basics. We can't afford our food. We can't afford our electric. We don't want that, especially for those people on a fixed income. The higher levels of government spending associated with war tends to generate some positive economic benefits in the short term, specifically through increased in economic growth occurring during conflict spending booms. So what they're talking about is during the boom moments, though, right when it starts and they ramp up. Right when they're about to go do a big offensive, a little ramp up. But other than that, the other times, the non-big boom moments, it's bad. However, negative unintended consequences occur either either concurrently with the war or develop as residual effects afterwards, thereby harming the economy over the longer term. As a disabled person and a retired person, you want a strong economy. That's one of the most important things to you because that means people are paying the taxes, which means they're paying into the programs you're taking from, which is good. Because remember, whole retirement, the whole Social Security disability insurance thing, that's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, you can put feathers on it and M&Ms, but the bottom line at the end of the day, that sugary goodness is a Ponzi scheme. Different approaches to financing the additional government expenditure and associated changes to the market economy meant that the macroeconomic effect varied for each period. In every period, however, gross investment either declined or grew at a very slow rate. And in all but one case during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, consumption also stalled. Each period can be summarized in the following way. World War II was financed through debt and higher taxes. By the end of the war, U.S. gross debt was over 120% of GDP, and tax revenue increased more than 3 times to over 20% of GDP, which sucks. That's horrible. Although GDP growth skyrocketed to over 17% in 1942, both consumption and remember, World War II ended in 1945. Remember that was a ramp-up period. Both consumption and investment experienced a substantial contraction. One of the key causes was government control over raw resources and materials. Trend lines taken from before the war and dating from 1933 onwards clearly indicate that for investment, consumption, and GDP growth, there was no increase in the trend lines after the war had finished. While unemployment was virtually eliminated, recovery was well underway prior to the war. And the key counterfactual is whether similar spending on public works would have generated even more growth. The stock market initially dropped, and once victory was foreseeable, then rose to be higher than that at the start of the war. Okay. Korean War was largely financed by higher tax rates and GDP averaging 5.8% between 1950 and 1953, with GDP growth peaking at 11.4% in 1951. During this period, however, investment and consumption stalled. The government needed to implement price and wage controls in response to inflation, which had increased due to the additional stimulus that was created by government spending. Notably, both consumption and investment resumed growth after the war. However, the growth was below the trend rate prior to the war. The stock market rose during the war. Vietnam War was unlike World War II and the Korean War. Okay, because remember that was a GDP thing, a tax rate hike. As it ramped up slowly with American troops deployment starting in 1965, this war was largely funded by increases in tax rates, but also with, here's the important part, an expansive monetary policy, which then subsequently led to inflation. Yay! Increases in non-military outlays also had a role to play. Unlike prior wars, consumption remained unaltered due to expansionary monetary policy through investment, although investments fell during the war. Again, as with 2 prior wars, GDP growth increased and peaked at 7.3% of GDP in 1966. At the beginning of 1965, the Dow Jones Index was at 900, and it wasn't until after 1982 that it stabilized above the 900 mark. Interesting. The Cold War. Because you know the Cold War is going to be a little special. Cold War period can be categorized as running from the late 1970s through to 1989. This period saw sustained increases in military spending alongside. Oh, Shirley, thank you, Shirley. I really appreciate it. Donate $4.99. Thank you, Madame. Howdy, Gardner. Howdy. Again, thank you, Shirley. The Cold War period can be categorized 1970s through 89. This period saw sustained increases in military spending alongside tax cuts, which then resulted in a blowout in the budget deficit. Although there was a boom in consumption, it was fueled by a combination of increased deficit spending and higher government debt, which in turn also caused interest rates to increase. You guys know what that means. This was also accompanied by a substantial trade deficit as well as a bull run, with the Dow Jones Index increasing from 1,121 in February 2003 to 2,810 in January 1990. Okay. Now, the one I know a lot of you guys are wondering about, we're going to do it right now. The Afghanistan and Iraq wars. How did that, the most modern war that we have, right? Because the war before that ended in 1989, which is not a modern war. A modern war is the Afghanistan and the Iraq wars, which, ended in the way that they did. The Afghanistan and Iraq wars were accompanied by weak economic conditions right from their beginning and corresponded with the bursting of the high-tech asset bubble, which led to the 2001-2002 recession. This is also the first time in U.S. history where taxes were cut during a war, which then resulted in both wars completely financed by deficit spending. A loose monetary policy was also implemented while interest rates were kept low and banking regulations were relaxed to stimulate the economy. All of these factors have contributed to the U.S. having severe, unsustainable structural imbalances in its government finances. This analysis does not seek to place value judgments on the effectiveness or justification of any particular conflict, but only to highlight the macroeconomic effects of the war spending. All right, it goes on and goes through the graphed out specifics. But what you need to learn here is that each war depended heavily on the economic situation that it started in. And then as it continued through there, how our economy interacted with its rev up periods, where we had to make a bunch of big military toys, little ones like tanks up to, big ships. So the crazy thing about this is that at the end of the day, they found consistently that we got higher taxes, inflation as a result of all these wars. So the problem is, from an economic standpoint, I don't think having a war with Russia is a good idea. Obviously, there's another bigger thing here, which is, a country can be taken over either by military force or internal degradation. And China always tends to try with the US to do internal degradation, whereas Russia is more of a, here's my fist, here's my glove, I'm going to beat you with them, right? That's how Russia tends to be in their application of we're going in. Whereas China tends to be like, well, we're going to hack all your computers and make you miserable. So those are the two types of, but those are it. Those are the two types of things that usually take place with war, right? It's either we're coming to get you or we're going to undermine the interior of your country. Okay. So here's kind of the bottom line that comes from that. Russia has a lot of military toys, many of which have the capacity to end everything on Earth, which is very scary. None of that should happen as a result of Ukraine. Do I think Ukraine should be able to be a free and natural and beautiful and wonderful country? Of course. But at what point does America stop playing dictator of the world and try to help its people first? Again, I don't understand why it's so incredibly important that we save Ukraine. I understand some of the, financial aspects, having a military base there is good. I get that all, but I just don't understand the full ramifications of why this is crucial. I think also that there's another problem here, which is that Russia is not a small problem country. It's not in Afghanistan. It's not in Iraq. It's not in Iran. It's Russia. And one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize that the news media does not tell people, which is that Russia is massive and scary and has military weapons that are incredible. Not that the US doesn't, but at the same time, I think it's very crucial to realize that Russia, Putin, is the big kid on the block over there. And then, to the southeast is China, right? And then, of course, you have some smaller groups. You've got India and you've got some of your European countries, and maybe Australia's in there, even though they're an island kind of separated from everybody, although they're worried about Taiwan. The point that I'm getting at here is that a war with Russia right now would be very bad economically for the disabled, economically for the retired. I don't want to see it. I don't, because it's just going to make things way, way worse. And my agenda is to try and get the American people to have more benefits that are, essentially retired or disabled. My agenda is not to see the U.S. wage another military war now that we just got out of one months ago. Right? Anyways, guys, I'm going to be doing a few more videos. I am super sick. I will catch you a little bit later. You have an absolutely wonderful day, and we'll go from there. Please stay safe and healthier than I'm doing right now, and we'll go from there. Thanks so much, guys. I'll catch you later. Bye-bye.